In the very beginning, I wanted to attract attention that God does not just call people to the church. God creates a new nation. And we see it in the beginning, what God speaks about Israel in Exodus chapter 19, verse 6, we read, "And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is the verse which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel." And pretty much the same is spoken by Apostle Peter in 1 Peter 2:9. "But ye are chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." We see the same wording here, holy nation, in Peter and in Exodus. And royal priesthood, how it puts Peter here in Greek language, it's pretty much the kingdom of priests in Hebrew language in book of Exodus. So it's just quoting the same text from Torah. So it is very important for God that he sees a church, his people called from different ethnicities, different nations of this world, being it Jews or Gentiles. It already doesn't matter because Jews became just like other Gentile nations, and they all contrapose, they're all opposed to God's nation, the spiritual Israel. And now it is important to tell that every nation has a certain culture, certain practices, certain traditions in everything from food to clothes to the way how people behave, and holidays or feasts of every nation is also important part of the culture, a part of the culture which actually uh, even strengthens that national identity of every nationality. If you're American, there are most probably like certain holidays which you count very important for you, and which person somewhere on another side of the planet does not even know probably about. Um, so those holidays by every nation are cherished, are kept, and something very important, which keeps the identity of the nation to the extent that it affects a lot whole planet sometimes. For example, did you know that the largest annual human migration is like every year it happens that during 1 month roughly 3 billion trips are made by people just because of a holiday. Guess which nation it is? Like the largest nation in the world, right? Chinese. The Chinese have in February their new year, well, it's like end of February, beginning of spring. They have a Lunar New Year festival. And the hundreds of millions of Chinese people traveling that time, many of them being in other countries, they're traveling to meet that holidays in China. And yeah, like 3 billion trips of them, like 73 million air flights and more than like almost 2.5 billion railroad trips. So people are going to China. It affects the prices of airline tickets. It affects many things in environment and transportation, businesses, the feast, the holidays. So it's important for Chinese people. It is national identity. So every nation has something of this kind. And it's not secret also that it can be a target during conflicts between nations. Uh, it is quite often when one nation occupies another one, when country is occupied by conquerors, the conquerors can prohibit national holidays because the national holidays are part of national identity, and the conquerors usually they don't want the conquered, the occupied nation to have strong national identity. They want to suppress it, and it can go through suppressing celebration of national feasts. Polish people probably remember it very well that during Soviet occupation, which started in 1945, they many holidays were prohibited, like original Polish holidays were prohibited. One of such, in 1946, actually, the next year, Polish people went to streets to celebrate their important holiday, the Day of Constitution. But it was Day of Polish Constitution, which was important for this nation, and Soviet troops which were located there, they actually entered city with tanks and stopped that celebration because the country was under, it was beyond the Iron Curtain. That's how we tell it now. Soviet Union was known to prohibit many holidays in many different countries, including my home country, Azerbaijan, or many countries in Central Asia, where many religious or national holidays were prohibited. But biblically, probably one of the most important, or probably biblically the most important, was a prohibition which happened in 4th century on the Council of Laodicea. The prohibition was maturing during some time, and it actually crystallized during the Council of Laodicea in years 363 to 364. The council took some time, and canon number 29 of it states, Christians shall not Judaize and be idle on Saturday. That is problem of English translation. The Greek original text doesn't use the word Saturday. It is told Sabbaton there. Sabbaton, Greek word, comes from Hebrew Shabbat. So they should not be idle on Sabbaton, but shall work on that day. But the Lord's Day, which at this time already was counted Sunday, it is 4th century, they shall especially honor, and as being Christians shall, if possible, do not work on that day. If, however, they are found Judaizing, meaning keeping the Shabbat, the Sabbaton, they shall be shut out from Christ, meaning they will be expelled from churches, and being expelled from churches at that time meant being ostracized from community, and in many cases, your assets could be confiscated. So it will involve financial punishment also. So it was prohibition of fees. And what is surprising here is this is one of the feasts established by God and the most important one, which is part of 10 Commandments. But here we see the prohibition of it. Why? Because the world took God's nation under occupation. So we see the same thing. We're probably not so interested in political things, how it happens between countries, but when it happens between Gentile nations and God's church, and God's church becomes under occupation of Gentile nation, and feasts of God's church are prohibited during, it is important, and during generations, from one generation to another, it affects how people see their feasts, and people change their opinions. Original opinions which were brought by God and endorsed by God change to be in accordance to what was enforced by the Gentile occupation forces. Of course, we understand that the ultimate example of that will be similar prohibition of Shabbat as a Sunday law, which will be in the very last time. The book of Revelation kind of predicts it. We understand that. But let us see now about different other feasts and different other feasts which God established, and what happened to that, and how it was changed, and some feasts were removed, prohibited, and some other feasts were introduced in their place, because it happened not only to Shabbat. First of all, why it is important even? I mean, Shabbat, yes, definitely. It is 10 commandments. It is one of 10 commandments. Shabbat is important. What about other feasts? I mean, we can argue that this celebration is not important. We can have actually theological justification to say that some of them are important, not important. We can probably see that some of them are later when we will study the topic. But is it even important for us not to celebrate worldly holidays, worldly feasts? can it somehow affect us if we do? Now the point is that if feasts are a part of the culture and part of national identity, celebrating them, going together with surrounding society, not God's nation, but other society, Gentiles, will eventually synchronize the cultures also. That may sound strange. Why? It is only feasts. It's not a big deal, right? But the history shows it. And if people celebrate something together, they gradually get synchronized on some other things also. Before we read some testimony from Ellen White, I can tell you that I witnessed it in my home city where I grew up. I grew up in Azerbaijan in the city of Baku, and the city was a melting pot of several different cultures. The local Azerbaijani culture lived together with lots of Russian people, Ukrainian people, and Jewish people. So there were different cultures, different religions, but in Soviet time, it wasn't very religious. It was very secular, but there are still many holidays and feasts coming from each of those cultures. And people living in one city, they kind of visited each other and celebrated many things together. And that led to a condition that I remember sometimes people were even confused, certain tradition, from where does it come? Because Azerbaijani people were asking, like, is it our tradition, or did we get it from Jews, or did we get it from Russians? So Russians could start doing some Azerbaijani tradition. So this mixture was coming through sharing common holidays and feasts. Now let us see what Ellen White writes about it. In Patriarchs and Prophets, page 458, we can read in Ellen White's testimony. It was by associating with idolaters and joining in their festivities that the Hebrews were led to transgress God's law and bring his judgments upon the nation. So now it is by leading the followers of Christ to associate with the ungodly and unite in their amusements that Satan is most successful in alluring them into sin. Come out from among them and be ye separate, says the Lord, and touch not the unclean. God requires of his people now as greatest distinction from the world in customs, habits, and principles as he required of Israel anciently. Patriarchs and Prophets, 458 page. So here she testifies kind of the same thing, that sharing festivals in the beginning, having fun together, brings some kind of synchronization between cultures if you give it enough time over the time. And when pondering about this, I realized that I recognize it from physics, from science. In science, there is such thing which is named spontaneous synchronization phenomenon. What does it mean? It means that if you take several oscillating devices, like one of simple example is pendulum. Yes, pendulum will sway right, left, it oscillates, but it can be different things. It can be even a satellite rotating around planet, or planets rotating around star, sun in our example. So if you take several oscillating things which move periodically, and you just set them nearby, near to each other, they don't need to touch each other. If they just will work over the time, they will get in sync. They will get synchronized. If in the beginning they had different frequencies and different periods of rotation, that will over the time become the same. That looks like magic. The only thing which is needed for it, why do we tell this? If they are standing near to each other, there should be some, at least very, very weak, but there should be some energy going from one to another. And it can be as little as even a sound. If a pendulum sways right, left, it emits some sound, or it will move some air. And that movement of air from one will gradually massage another one, and they will come to the same frequencies and period. Let me demonstrate it to you. It was very easy to find demonstration of this scientific experiment online. Can you see the video? I mean, if I will play this video, hopefully you will see how it goes. Let's see. So he touches several oscillators, you see, and they start going, and they all go in different period and slightly even different frequencies, I believe. And see, they're different. Can it be that not touching each other, they will gradually come to synchronization? You see, on the right side, they're already kind of synchronized. The left one is still different, but over the time, give it enough time, they will start going in sync. You see, it's almost there. And now it is there. They go synchronize it now. In the beginning, it was different, right? And now they are the same. And it is not magic, it is purely physics. So why it happens, if you see all oscillators are standing on one board, which is on two, it is soda can, I believe. So, yeah, it is soda can or something. And it slightly shakes. So look, let me do it again. So when they oscillate, this platform on which they stand slightly shakes right and left. And that is enough to pass energy from one to another, and they go in sync. Very slight, just, and how long did it take? It took 1 minute only. Now, even stranger may sound if I will tell you that even if they are not standing on the same platform, even if they do not, if they are not soda cans, if it is just sound going from one to another, even that will be enough to synchronize them, but it will take probably not 1 minute. It can take weeks or months, but it will take much longer time, but it will lead to synchronization. So this thing, this phenomenon, which happens in mechanics, it happens in physics everywhere. Actually, that is one of the reasons why we may be bringing to evolutionists who tell about multi-billion years existing solar system of ours. And we can point to planets which are still not synchronized, satellites of most planets, they're not synchronized. So we can point to that it cannot be multi-billion years. So it's all calculatable. We can calculate and demonstrate that over hundreds of millions of years, this rotation of astronomical bodies should go in sync. If it's not in sync, it means that they did not have enough time for it. Well, but it doesn't happen only to physical body, and it is not only about mechanics. It's also about cultures. If countries, nations coexist, if they participate in sharing something, give it enough time, and they will become the same. And which one will dominate? The one who is stronger, the one who has more people, that one will dominate. Knowing that, and knowing that his church usually does not have the majority of people in any country. In any country, there are more Gentiles than God's people. God is very strict about limiting even to zero the sharing of principles and cultural phenomena, etc., including feasts, including celebrations. So when God brings to life his new nation, he creates for them, as every nation has their feasts, he creates, God himself tells them which are feasts to celebrate. And even God gives them a calendar according to which the feast should be done. Notice, we will see it in Torah now. it's well described in several books of Torah. The full schedule is given in Leviticus chapter 23, which we'll see. But notice that these feasts God makes from the scratch, brand new. He does not reuse any existing feasts of any existing nations. Israelites, when they were brought from Egypt, they did not have those feasts. They did not have this culture in general. They were living in Egypt, right? God does not reuse feasts of Egyptians. Their patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Isaac, and Jacob, they lived in Canaan land among Canaanites and Phoenicians. God does not reuse Phoenician feasts, Canaanite feasts. Before that, Abraham lived on another side from river Euphrates. He lived in Aramean land, and Abraham is Aramaic by his ancestry. That's how it is written in Torah. He's Aramean, but God does not reuse Aramean Syrian feasts also. No, he doesn't reuse any. He makes a brand new ones. And he starts, in order to give the schedule of feasts, with new calendar and how the new year should be diagnosed, if you want, and celebrated. Actually, there is no celebration at all. In whole biblical notions, there is no such thing as celebration of not meaningful things and cyclical celebration of something which doesn't have spiritual meaning. There is no such thing. That's why it is taught about New Year, but New Year is never a feast. It's not celebrated. Well, so what is taught about the New Year? The New Year in Egypt actually was heavily celebrated. It was of great importance. And when did it happen? It happened in summer. It was New Year in Egypt was when star Sirius became visible in the middle of July, roughly. It was before that, in all winter, and we can tell even fall, winter, and spring, Sirius star was not visible. It was under the horizon because of tilt of our planet in rotation. But in the middle of July, Sirius again is visible on sky. And it means for Egyptians that the Nile River soon will be full with lots of water because of natural cycle of water level in Nile River, because of some rain periods in Central Africa, where Nile was coming from. And that was important for the agriculture. So that was their New Year. But God, of course, did not use that milestone. He used something different. And that is really strange because let us read it first. In Exodus chapter 12, in verse 2, and then we read, "This month unto you the beginning of months," which means it is first month. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. And then in 6th verse, we read about Passover. And you shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So it is month which is named Abib, or later after Babylonian captivity, the same month took the Babylonian name Nisan, but original Hebrew name is Abib. On the 14th of month Abib is Pesach, or Passover, great, very important feast about which we will speak a bit later. But when is the New Year? It's beginning of Abib is beginning of New Year. So if Pesach is, or Passover is 14th of Abib, so New Year is 2 weeks before it. Passover is very end of March or beginning of April. And it means that New Year, according to God's calendar, is somewhere in the middle of March or second half of the March, 2 weeks before the Passover. It is interesting that the very milestone of the new year here is not astronomical. Listen, almost all nations of Middle East, they were very good at astronomy, and they were putting their calendar in synchronization of movement of certain stars. We just talked about Sirius, which was important for Egyptians. Sumerians also had the new year connected to movement to certain stars, and Akkadians, Armenians, etc. But why such strange beginning of New Year for Hebrews? You know what does mean Abib? The very name of the month speaks about what is the beginning of New Year. Abib is a condition of barley when barley is already edible. It's not ripe yet, but you already can take the seeds from the ear of the plant of barley and eat it, though it's not ripe yet, but it's already there. So this condition of barley is named Abib. It means that the barley, the grain is in the ear. So it is certain agricultural thing, important, of course, but why not to rely on more precise astronomical sign? And here, what comes to my mind, the point here is that all astronomical events are common for all nations. If you see the star, I also see the star, and everybody around sees the star, no matter what is the national identity, right, or religion or something. Like the stars which will be seen in Israel, the same stars will be seen by Moabites, or the same stars will be seen by people in Babylon. So astronomical events are shared for everybody. But now, when they go to land of Israel, only Israelites will live in the land of Israel. There should be no Gentiles in that land. Well, it happened, unfortunately, but God's plan and according to God's law, there should be no pagans, no Gentiles in all land of Israel, only his people. So the condition of barley, when barley comes to Abib, is observed only by his nation, only by his people. So this beginning of the calendar, and remember that beginning of new year extrapolates to all other feasts of the year. Every feast of the year depends on where was the first day of Abib, because that is a calendar. So the feasts belong to the nation of Israel. They belong to those who have the land of Israel. They are not shared through signs visible on the sky to everybody. Why? All the feasts, and we'll look through them, they are historical and they are eschatological. What does that mean? All those feasts, they have some meaning in the history of Israel. Read history of God's nation. And they have a meaning which is in the future, the meaning prophetic, the meaning about God's plan of salvation up to second coming, and even things which will be happening after second coming. Feasts point to that. So the feasts are not just feasts to eat well and to congratulate each other. No, the feasts have prophetic meaning, historical and eschatological prophetic meaning. And those meanings cannot be perceived by Gentiles. They do not belong to other nations. They belong only to God's nation. That's why the very beginning of calendar also, it belongs only to God's nation. Because when in Israel land, barley becomes Abib, that condition, you remember, when the grain is in the ear, that is one time. But in other countries, it's different climate, different weather, it's different ground, it is different time. So they are not synchronized. God's nation is never synchronized in their feasts with other nations. And that is important. So, and besides that, of course, we can tell that stars, which were showing the calendars and months for all nations of the world, for most nations, there were some pagan deities. Stars had certain meaning as, or constellations also had certain meaning as pagan deities. They were being worshipped. And of course, they are not important as deities or something for Israelites, because Israelites know the living God. Shouldn't it be for us the same if God shows through his feast and his calendar that eschatological plan of events is related to something for the church, mostly, not something for the world? So when we think about last day events and think of eschatologically, like what must be happening, we know there will be certain things, last day events, the trumpets, the seven plagues, the things described in book of Revelation. It does not depend much on the world. It depends on the church. Yeah, there will be certain things in the world, but listen, the things in the world will happen when the church is ready for them. The Sunday law will tell, yeah, the Sunday law will happen when the church will be ready to stand during Sunday law. Of course, unfortunately, it will not happen to all church, but there should be a remnant in the church which will be able to stand. So we should not look on those cataclysms, on political events, on macroeconomical events, and everything else which is happening in the world. We can tell that, yeah, epidemics are happening, pandemics are happening. Yeah, Jesus told they will be happening. Jesus never told that by counting pandemics, we can understand when the end will come. Jesus never told that observing wars will be able to understand when exactly the end will come. Well, people were thinking about the end time coming during First World War and during Second World War. People were not able to understand, like, the Second World War, tens of millions of people fighting and dying, nuclear bombs thrown on cities, like, what can be worse? But no, it is not the end of the world yet. There will be more wars, unfortunately, there will be more pandemics, there will be more cataclysms, but that is a process of the world as a side effect of degradation of the world. Cataclysm actually a side effect of degradation of Earth as planet, the physical, the biological being of the planet. But the eschatological plan of God, the fulfillment of the prophecies, is tied not to those things, it is tied to what is happening to God's remnant people. And I tell to God's remnant people, I don't tell to a corporate body of church with a certain brand name and certain logotype and certain website. No, I know about remnant people. So God's church is about beliefs and practices, not about the brand name and legal incorporation. So we understand that about the calendar, and that's important. Now, if we talk about Abib, the meaning of Abib, that barley is in the ear, we can even understand something about seven plagues of Egypt. And seven plagues of Egypt actually are parallel to many things in book of Revelation. Let us see. In Exodus chapter 9, verse 31, 32, we read about the seventh plague, the hail. You remember, there were 10 plagues pretty much, from turning water to blood to 10th plague, which was all firstborn in whole country was smitten. So the plague number 7 was a hail from God. And it is told about the hail in Exodus 9:31, I read, and the flax and barley was smitten, for the barley was in ear, and the flax was boiled, but the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. Yeah, we know that wheat and rye grow slower than barley, especially in very dry climate like Middle East in general is. Barley grows faster. That's why in general, in many places, barley was cultivated more than wheat, because it can withstand the dry weather better, and it gives harvest early. It can be grown on more sandy ground. So barley is first. Wheat grain did not form yet. Barley already formed, and we see the same word here, the word Abib. Barley was in the ear when the 7 plagues was happening, which means that it was, if barley is in the ear, it is Abib. It means that it was at least first day of Abib. It can be second, third, I don't know. But the month Abib had already to start. So 7 plagues, the hail, had to happen not earlier than Abib the first. Now, we know that Passover was Abib 14th, and before Passover, they had to take the lamb on Abib 10th, and it was told to Moses by God in Exodus 12, chapter 12, verse 3, tell congregation of Israel, in the 10th of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb. If God speaks it on the 10th day, you take the lamb. It means that God doesn't speak it on the day 10. The latest it can be told is day 9 of Abib. So it means that this saying is the latest is day 9, and that is spoken about the Passover, which is after 9th plague. The 9th plague was a darkness. Darkness in Egypt was lasting 3 days. So if darkness stopped before God speaks this to Moses, darkness had to stop at day 8. Well, it could take a part of day night, probably. If day night wasn't, the darkness was stopped, the conversation of Moses with Pharaoh, and then God gives the prophecy to Moses. Yeah. So was probably darkness was days 8, 7, 6, during these days, which, if we take into account that 7th plague, the hail, was happening not earlier than Abib 1, then the 2nd plague, locusts, were somewhere between Abib 2 and Abib 5 during these 4 days. So we see that these last plagues are very dense. They are like very together. They go literally one after another. During literally 8 days, 3 plagues are happening one after another. And darkness is taking 3 days of those 8. Locusts probably also is taking more than 1 day. So there was literally, with these last plagues, there were even no period of ease, no period when Egypt was not smitten. We understand that there are 10 plagues and probably plagues before 7th, plagues from 1 to 6. They could take a longer time, we don't know. Probably there was interludes between plagues. Yeah, they could take several months. Not more than 1 year, by the way, because of the age of Moses. It's told that Moses was 80 when he came to Egypt to take Israel and out of the country, and then 40 years in desert, and then he died at age 120, which means that he was in Egypt taking Israel. So those 10 plagues, they were happening in less than 1 year. But first 6 plagues, we don't know how long, but plagues 7 to 9 were happening within 8 days, meaning without any period, any gaps between them. And right after 9th plague, the darkness, which was 3 days, which was terrible, right after that, it stopped. There is no plague. Day 10, no plague. Then 11, no plague. Day 12, no plague. Then day 13, nothing. So Egyptians could think that it's all done. Now it's cool. It was very bad, and now we made it. It finished. only Israel would know that these are 3.5 days from 10 to 14 actually, which they are preparing the Passover lamb, and then every firstborn in the country will be smitten. So we understand now why in book Revelation, we know, and Jesus is telling that people will tell that it is peace, it is peace. There is no peace. So there will be cataclysms, there will be plagues on earth, which will go very dense. And then just before the end, there will be a window, a window, and it looks like it is finished and there is nothing bad anymore. If the plague of Egypt is a pattern for events in book of Revelation. So this calendar helps us to understand how it will go. Probably it will help us to understand better certain events in the book of Revelation.